Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Developing Younger Radiology Leaders Succession Planning. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Larry Muroff. Dr. Muroff is the immediate past CEO and president of Imaging Consultants, providers of consulting services to radiologists, hospitals, and corporations. He is also an adjunct clinical professor at the University of Florida and the University of South Florida College of Medicine. For 20 years, he served as member of a 45-plus radiology practice where he held several leadership positions, including serving as president. In terms of his educational background, Dr. Muroff is an honors graduate of Dartmouth College and Harvard Medical School. He is a member of the Phi Beta Kappa and Alpha Omega Alpha societies. He has been a recipient of the Gold Medal Award for both the Florida Radiological Society and the American College of Radiology. He has been listed in Who's Who in America and Who's Who in the World. He is listed in publications such as the Best Doctors in America 2000. His radiology, socioeconomic expertise, and his educational expertise were recognized in separate cover stories in diagnostic imaging. He was also featured in a cover story in Imaging Economics. Dr. Muroff was designated by Aunt Minnie as radiology's most effective educator in 2010 and was awarded the 2016 to 2017 Distinguished Career Achievement Award by Dartmouth Medical School. He has served as president of several national and regional imaging organizations. He is a board member for the ACR's Radiology Leadership Institute and the Neiman Health Policy Institute. He has authored more than 80 scientific and socioeconomic articles and has presented at over 1,000 invited lectures throughout the United States and Europe. So with that, I will now turn things over to you, Dr. Muroff.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And the topic today is developing younger radiology leaders, succession planning. First, with the obligatory disclosure. Regrettably, I have nothing to disclose, but that said, let's talk about these two very important topics. First of all, we have to understand that developing young radiologist leaders and succession planning, while peripherally related, are in reality two very distinct topics. So let's start first with succession planning and understand why it's important for radiology groups. The basic premise is that without appropriate succession planning, at times of transition, whether those times are planned or unexpected, groups can flounder rudderless and be at a major competitive disadvantage or worse without succession planning that has been predetermined by the practice. At best of times, governing a radiology group can be very difficult because in general, once one achieves shareholder status, we all have an equal voice, vote, and income stream. So with that in mind and understanding how difficult it is to govern a practice, let's start with what doesn't work for radiology practices and their leaders. And we can say that with rare exception, groups that rotate the president of the practice basically are saying that the business executive is the de facto leader of the group. And while that might sound good, in my experience, the best circumstance for a practice is when the business executive and the radiologist leaders work synergistically together. So let's look at the practice president. The practice president should be empowered to act on behalf of a group according to a mission statement and business plan. And although this is beyond the scope of this particular presentation to go into this in depth, I think it is very important to note that while most groups have a mission statement, that mission statement really is not effective for leadership. It's usually a statement of vision or a statement of what you would like to be, but in reality, in order to govern a practice, a mission statement should say who you are, what you do, and where you want to do it. And appended to that mission statement should be a business plan so that the president and the executive committee knows exactly what the practice members expect them to accomplish within a given time frame. Now, there should be a finite term to the president of a practice, but that individual should be selected with the idea that he or she will be reelected. And the reason for that is that people that we deal with, hospital CEOs, business leaders, board members, all look at tenure as power. If a hospital knows that a president of a practice will be rotated in 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 years is the blink of an eye for an administrator of a hospital system. They will just wait you out. But if they know that they have to deal with you in the long term, you have far more power in any negotiation that you have with the hospital administration. And it's also important for practice members to allow the president the time necessary to advocate on behalf of the group. Now, one important thing, if you are giving administrative time to the president, that president must communicate well with the practice members and let those members know what he or she is doing. So why is it important to elect the correct individual? And the reason for that is leadership requires certain skills. You certainly wouldn't rotate your neuroradiologist into a women's imaging rotation. So why would you rotate radiologists without the needed skills into positions of practice leadership? So what are those skills? Well, I've already mentioned communication capability, but the practice president also needs to be a consensus builder. He or she should have at least rudimentary human resources knowledge. Certainly that individual should have negotiation skills. They should possess emotional intelligence, often called common sense, and they should be perceived as having maturity, not necessarily age, but gravitas in the eyes of both the practice members and those that the practice president must deal with. So, given the fact that it's important to select the right person as president, how should your practice groom and keep its leaders in positions that maximally benefit the group? Well, the first is the importance of having an effective governance structure. And in most private practices throughout the country, certainly in most independent private practices, there is a corporate form of governance. There's a president, a board of directors, and shareholders. So the first premise is to elect your president with the idea of permanence. The president may, and in fact should, stand for re-election every 3 or 4 years, but think about substantial tenure when you vote a person into that position. As for succession planning, executive committee members are ideal candidates. The succession process should begin at least 3 years before any planned transition is to take place. And one way to accomplish this is to identify 2 to 4 candidates in a practice and give them projects to manage. set appropriate timelines for project completion, and hold individuals accountable for their successes or failures. Make sure that several practice members have leadership training. And again, remember that those needed skills include not only the ability to communicate, but consensus building, HR knowledge, negotiations, emotional intelligence, and gravitas. Appropriate meetings where members of your practice might obtain this leadership training include the RLI Summit, the ACR Annual Meeting, the ACR RBMA Practice Leaders Forum, non-clinical tracks of the RSNA and other specialty organizations, and the Economics of Diagnostic Imaging National Symposium. So let's shift gears now and go from succession planning to developing young radiologist leaders. This caricature summarizes a problem that exists in many practices. If you look at the shoes of both runners, you will see that the older radiologist is slightly ahead of the younger radiologist. And it's important to note that young radiologists will rarely, if ever, outmaneuver the older members of the practice. And attempts to do so will invariably cause unnecessary disruption and result in frustration for both the young radiologists and the older radiologists. Now, this statement is not meant to give any radiologist, no matter what his or her age, a free pass, but it does point out the situation in most practices, and that is, if there is a problem, it's usually the established leadership that can remedy it. In most groups, there are older radiologists who can serve as role models and mentors for younger members of the practice, particularly those who aspire to leadership roles. So, how then should young radiologists get involved in practice leadership? I think the most important thing for young radiologists to understand is that leadership in a practice is a process, it's a journey. With almost no exception, you don't join a practice and immediately become its president. But that said, you can make a difference, a significant difference from the beginning, and then develop the skills that a practice needs or requires from its leaders. So, what can you do? What should you do to make a difference in your radiology practice? The first and most fundamental thing that a young radiologist can do is to read everything that pertains to the practice. That is, hospital contracts, employment agreements between the group and its radiologists, bylaws and policies, anything that you can read that pertains to your practice gives you a leg up on most anyone else in the practice and permits you to make important, meaningful contributions when discussions about these documents take place. The second thing that you can do is to serve on practice and hospital committees. In my experience, the most important thing that a radiology group can do to solidify its position in the hospital and maximize its opportunity for tenure in its hospital is to integrate its members into not only the medical, but the political and social structure of the hospital and the community as well. So by serving on practice and hospital committees, a young radiologist gets themselves known, helps become more indispensable, and at the same time serves the practice by augmenting its roles that help ensure the tenure that practices desire. Attend the leadership meetings that we previously discussed. And also remember that an important part of leadership is followership. Being a good follower is, in most cases, a prerequisite for assuming a leadership role in a practice. Now, I'd like to leave as much time as possible for Q&A, so let's know that we've only scratched the surface, but the time that I have allocated for my presentation is up. So let's move on, and I'm looking forward to a valuable and informative Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Muroff. We are now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. The first question is, what is the optimal length of time one should lead a practice? Would you recommend 3 years, 5, 10, 15, or forever?
Well, forever is a long time, but certainly I think 3 years is too short a time. Now, I said that there should be periodic elections every 2, 3, or 4 years for the presidency. And certainly if the president is incompetent or a scoundrel or not representing the group appropriately, he or she should not be reelected. But if you've selected the appropriate person, then I think you should be looking in the 8 to 10 to 12 year tenure for a president. Unfortunately, due to the structure of radiology, the culture of private practice, everyone has an equal voice, vote, and income stream. And many people believe that they have to comment or provide input on every little item in a practice, and that can burn presidents out. So typically in most practices, good presidents burn out before you would like to see their tenure end.
Great, thank you. So our next question is, how do you keep your best radiologists from becoming burned out when they are given projects?
Well, I mentioned burned out. Now you've brought it up, and I think it's an important topic in radiology today. I think that what most radiologists consider burnout really isn't burnout. I think that if you have an opportunity to do what you do well, what you're trained to do, you will relish the opportunity to do that. For example, if you're a neuroradiologist and you are provided with interesting cases throughout the day, that challenges you, it invigorates you. But if you're a neuroradiologist and half the day is spent sloshing barium or measuring scoliosis angles, that becomes very difficult and burns one out. As for leadership, the same thing is true. Typically, the maxim, give a busy person more to do and you'll get it done, holds very true, because if you enjoy leadership, if you relish non-clinical challenges, you will be invigorated by them. So the trick for a president or for a group as a whole is to match the skill sets of the individual, non-clinical or clinical, with the tasks needed to be accomplished in the practice.
Okay, our next question is, do you think age plays a role in identifying new leaders, or can anyone of any age be seen as a possible leader in training?
Well, I think that leadership demands a skill set. And I think that there are some people who, by dint of their personality, are not suited to leadership roles. They may be outstanding clinical radiologists, but not have the patience to take on the more HR aspects or emotional intelligence aspects. So again, it's getting the right people in the right roles that serve a practice best.
Perfect. Our next question is, my chief is leaving our academic organization unexpectedly in 6 months. I have been asked to submit my candidacy. What is the best way to do this?
Well, I think the best way, whether you're in academics or in private practice, to advance your role in leadership is to have your mentors or associates, or sometimes even your subordinates, promote you to the chair of the department for that position. It's a lot better for a trusted, respected member of the faculty to say, I think Jen Nathan would do an outstanding job in this position, than for Jen Nathan to say, I think I can do an outstanding job. Now, having said that, if it is not appropriate or not possible to get someone else to advocate on your behalf, then you should do it yourself. There are all ways to promote your own candidacy. Usually, the best way is to say to the chair, we've worked together on several projects in the past. I am devoted to the department. I am appreciative of your leadership, and I think that I am ready to step up for more responsibility, i.e. this position that has now unexpectedly come open.
Perfect. So our next question is, can Dr. Muroff comment on the relevance of management degrees such as MBA, MMM, MHA, in becoming a radiology leader in the upcoming 10 years?
Well, Jonathan Berlin, who's the co-chair of the ACR RBMA meeting, gave a lecture on this very topic a couple of years ago, and his views mirror mine, and that is it's not essential that one has an MBA. It is helpful, certainly, to get training in the business aspects of your profession. It is helpful to understand financial issues that are under discussion. So I don't think it detracts from your ability to assume leadership, and may in some cases be helpful, but it's certainly not essential. Now, having said that, there have been some academic positions for chair that mandated a non-clinical degree, such as an MBA or a master's in health administration. But those are few and far between. So I think the concise answer is it can't hurt you, but it's not necessary.
Okay, perfect. Our next question is, how would you employ today's teachings for radiologists in a large multi-center radiology practice, be it civilian or governmental?
How would you employ today's teaching? I think that today's teaching focused around, I believe the question focuses around the issues of developing young radiologists and succession planning. For a private practice, I think it is imperative that they pay attention to both of these topics. I have seen outstanding practices plan anywhere from 3 to 5 years out for a smooth succession. And these same practices do it by seeing that members of the group have leadership training and then giving members tasks to accomplish so that the current president can assess the efficacy of an individual's abilities in these in active situations, in meaningful situations. In academics, where there often is a search committee, if an internal candidate is sought, then obviously all of the points that were discussed in this lecture apply. If not, then the leaders that have been groomed still have the ability to seek chairmanship or chairs elsewhere. So in both academics and private practice, I think these two important topics are very helpful in sustaining the practice itself and in invigorating and developing young radiologists.
Great. So our next question is, can you give a rule of thumb for time required for administrative activities?
Well, I think the time required varies from less than a day a week to almost a full-time, or in some cases, a full-time administrative position. And it depends on the size of the practice. It depends on the complexity of the issues. So these are considerations. The sad thing is that data gained at the economics of diagnostic imaging over the years, over the last 5 years, suggests that half the radiology practices in the country don't provide any administrative time. And I think that this is harmful to a practice. Typically, in the more hierarchical academic situation, the chair can determine what he or she deems necessary, and far more administrative time is allocated. So I would say in academics, the appropriate amount of time, or some might argue even too much time, is allocated for administration. In private practice, typically not enough. The key for both is for practice members, whether academic or private, for practice members to believe that the leader is spending that time working on their behalf.
Okay, great. Next question is, how do you discover hidden talents, areas where your radiologists can thrive in your direct reports?
Well, again, since this is the Radiology Leadership Institute, I'm assuming that the question talks about hidden leadership talents. And typically, people interested in leadership who deserve to be leaders take actions such as the ones that I have outlined, reading all of the documents, serving on appropriate committees, so that they're not hidden. One problem that I've seen in private practice more so than in academics is that there are people that desperately want to be the president of the group who have no business being the president of a practice, and therefore shareholders, people voting on those individuals, need to be very careful about who they put into a position of leadership. In academics, sometimes the leader is thrust on the department, but in private practice, typically the leader is elected and can be removed. So if you'll notice earlier in the presentation, I said putting the correct individual into the position of practice president. I think that's the most important thing that a shareholder can do. And the people that deserve to be in leadership positions will demonstrate that by the actions that they take, their willingness to assume minor to major positions of non-clinical responsibility.
Okay, next question is, should you promote a junior faculty who has been in your practice just for 3 years and not choose a senior faculty member who may have more experience to lead others? And this is in regards to potentially an academic practice, more so than private practice.
Well, interesting that you said that, because initially when I heard the question, I thought academics. But the same thing's true in private practice, although, again, not in that same pyramidal structure of faculty members, section heads, assistant or associate chairs, and chair. I think the real gift of a department chair in academics is to make sure that the appropriate people are promoted into the positions that they deserve by their skill sets and talent. So whether someone's there for 3 years and someone's been there for 33 years, if that person is essential, the 3-year person is essential to the department, then he or she should be put in that position. However, this is where the real emotional intelligence, common sense, communication skills come to the fore. You've got to convince that 30-year person that they are valuable. You want to retain them. They are a major contributor to the department, and this skipping, as it were, of skipping over, it was justified because of unique skill sets. Now, the same thing's true in private practice. Sometimes you see a young, very non-clinically skilled individual who needs to be placed in a position of responsibility so that he or she can assume a leadership position in the practice, or even be placed in that leadership role in what otherwise might be considered a premature manner. So your question applies to both academics and private practice, and there are instances where that young person has to jump the older person in the hierarchy for the betterment of the practice itself. And the skills of the chair or the president in making the older members still feel valued and valuable comes to the fore.
Okay, next question is, oh, I'm sorry, did you have anything else to add, or?
No, I just
Okay.
called. So.
Next question, how do you best break bad news from your hospital supervisors that you and your direct reports disagree with?
Well, bad news, again, this question seems to have an academic bias or bent to it, but it applies to both private practice and academics. And I think the most effective chairs and the most effective practice presidents are those that are the most transparent, that communicate best to their practice or department members. So sometimes news can be very bad. For example, in a private practice setting, the president might have just been called into the CEO of the hospital's office and told that the hospital is going to send out an RFP, a request for proposal for radiology services to multiple entities. And the group might have an opportunity to respond as well as others. Similarly, in academics, there might be personnel cuts, there might be funding cuts, and to keep these secret, I think serves no effective purpose. And I think that if you're honest with your personnel, whether that be shareholders and employee radiologists in a private practice or faculty members in an academic practice, you're far better off. You know, here's the bad news. We're in it together. Here's how we're going to work to solve the problem or deal with the problem.
Well, perfect. So that concludes all of the submitted questions. So I'd like to thank you, Dr. Muroff, for your insight and expertise. If you have any other questions, you can contact RLI at rli@acr.org. If you've enjoyed this program and want more leadership training, the RLI has a plethora of options available at acr.org/RLI. You don't have to be a department head to be a leader. Leadership is for everyone. So on behalf of RLI and our presenter, Dr. Muroff, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.